There are experiences or voices that seem to come as interruptions to the life that we think we're living. Stories that push or shoulder their way into our story, as attention-seeking as Ollie, my 165-pound puppy, who simply crawls onto my lap and unceremoniously sits, declaring, "I'm here, pay attention to me now." And no matter how intent I am on my individual journey or destination, I have a choice. I can choose to resent that intrusion, or I can attempt to determine what it is that this insistent presence is attempting to say. Is there reason, wisdom, or connection to be found in the waylay? Such is the way of the gospel we have today. A woman is bleeding, hemorrhaging, exhausted for 12 years. Her lifeblood has been draining from her. 12 years, the exact span of time that the daughter of Jairus, our powerful synagogue leader, has been alive. His daughter, who is now hovering near death. And Jairus has come pleading with Jesus to go with him so his daughter can be made well. So Jesus begins his journey with this synagogue leader and is halted midway by this bleeding woman. With one desperate gesture, she who seemed to be intent on anonymity in the crowd reaches out to touch the hem of Jesus' robe. And in this one move, this nameless woman breaks into our biblical narrative. Interrupting an account of healing, she offers to us the chance to see that our personal stories do not come as autonomous, unbroken, and discrete, tidy arcs. These two stories of healing, these stories of resurrection, become forever intertwined. And we find that what appeared as an interruption has become, in hindsight, a joining of symbiotic parts, creating something yet more whole. A powerful play that is still being pieced together, even as we live today, listening to what God has to say. And this is just part of what we learn from the Gospel of Mark in this text. As we are listening, we find that God is always attentive to what we are saying, even in our silent utterings. We utter our most elemental prayers in our moments of greatest despair. Writer and former professor at San Francisco Theological, Howard Rice, reminds us that "help me, O God," is the greatest natural prayer of every human being. It flows forth from us in moments of distress, even from those who question or claim not to have faith. When all is lost, where else can we turn but to a power beyond, a higher power, a power we trust that cannot be defeated? God is listening, especially when the voices have not been heard anywhere else. I recall when the Presbyterian Church, PCUSA, was formed, reunited, actually, a reunification of the northern and southern branches, the branches that were separated because of the Civil War. And one of the first things they worked to do was to create a statement of faith. And 7 years later, because they do things decently and in order, they began to rework their statement. And so it was that in 1991, their statement of faith evolved to include a line, "The Spirit gives us courage to hear the voices of people long silenced." And I certainly was not behind any of those doors where it was being written. But from one who was, I know that there were discussions, quite a few discussions, about that proposed line. To whom is that line referring? Just whose voices are we not hearing? Some people needed answers to that question. One of the theologians, who clearly had a great deal of patience and kindness, he helped to draft the statement, and so he articulated that those whose voices had not been heard knew immediately to whom that line referred. And including that one line meant they were including all of those who had been excluded. Voices, experiences, ideas that had not been taken seriously or been heard. The voices of those that were growing tired of being discounted when they spoke. It takes courage. It takes courage to continue to speak. Tireless courage, especially if you've been silenced time and again. It takes courage to speak up if you're shut out from the mainstream. Courage to continue to show up when society tells you to shut up. It took courage for this woman to simply be in the crowd, knowing that if she was discovered, she was guilty of violating all of the rules. She's unclean. She was not allowed near anyone for 12 years. She hasn't been allowed to touch or be touched by anyone. If discovered in the crowd, her presence would have made anyone who even brushed up against her unclean. Reaching out to touch Jesus, she made him unclean. Yet in her anguish, attempting this anonymous silence, she courageously reached out, and the silent uttering of her plea, "Help me, oh God," reverberated through the fabric of the hem into the fabric of his very being. On the way to the known daughter of the powerful synagogue leader, this unknown anonymous woman makes Jesus pause to call her from the crowd and make her silent suffering story come into the fray. This interwoven story pulls at our threads in modern history, reminding us that anguish is ageless. Anguish is not anonymous. If anything, it's ubiquitous. On some scale, each one of us knows and has felt a deep pain or a torment in our lives. We have known a diagnosis that terrifies us, or a mental illness in us or our family, a loss of employment or loss of meaning and purpose, a relationship suddenly torn apart, or perhaps a pandemic that smothers a family or a nation. We know attitudes and systems that relentlessly dehumanize. And the dehumanization of one, anyone, reduces the humanity in all of us. So calling this woman to the forefront gives insight into Christ's ministry. The Greek word used here, is not just healing, but rather the word indicates being made whole. And in truth, the way it's used in the sentence in relation to the words around it means all that were in the crowd were made whole in that moment, because the silence was broken. Her suffering was made known. She was made known. She was named. She was heard and seen. She becomes the daughter of God. As James Edwards says in the Gospel according to Mark, the persistence of Jesus in discovering who touched him rivals the woman's persistence in reaching Jesus. She wanted a cure. a something. Jesus desires a personal encounter with someone. He's not content to dispatch a miracle. He wants to encounter a person. The kingdom of God. Miracle leads to meeting. Discipleship is not simply getting our needs met. It's being in the presence of Jesus and being known by him and following him. It is courageous when we step beyond just getting our needs met. Now, I imagine Jairus might not have been feeling that particular courageous emotion. He's probably feeling anxiety of having to just wait for this scene to finish up. But before we move on, I invite us to wonder at how much courage it would take for those of us in this place of privilege to do as this text invites us to do as the Presbyterian Statement of Faith invites us to do. Ask the Spirit to give us courage to hear the voices of people long silenced. Because it can be risky. Risky to listen rather than simply demand to be heard. Risky to break taboos and push beyond the rules of culture and political engagement. Risky because in our listening we will encounter the challenge to dismantle carefully constructed systems in our life. It takes courage to listen and be open to the power that can transform us. But when we do, it'll lead to a resurrection, and that's the other half of the story.
Another character, just imagine being Jairus, this synagogue ruler who has power, who is well known, who is respected, who is used to people in the community of faith taking some direction from him. He's also, mind you, used to a level of spiritual propriety, follows the law, the Torah, as a stickler. He has to also be in the public limelight. So you can imagine that keeping clean and purity laws are vital to his public persona as well as his private spiritual life. So here's this man who has all these things, and I want to stress this, all of that human-made hoops of piety are thrown out the window because he's got this little girl. And I don't care how old your son or daughter is, they're always your little boy or your little girl, even when they're adults. And she is dying. And with all his resources, with all his wealth, with all his connections in the community, he can't fix it. He's vulnerable. He is powerless. He is desperate. Two desperate people. This man who is used to having things done is interrupted by this unknown, invisible woman who is impoverished because she's gone through everything she has. And if I'm Jairus, I'm ticked off. Lord, I appreciate that this woman has a need. She's been waiting 12 years. She can wait another 5 minutes. My daughter needs you now. We have to go now. Woman, mind your place. You also have the male-female dynamic there. And who do you think you are? This is an emergency. So we have a desperate, out-of-the-blue tragedy, mayday situation, and we have this long, slow burn colliding. This text is so beautiful because it describes all of us. Our own day-to-day struggles, drowning moments, overwhelmed, the realization that after all this illusion of control, we're not in control of anything. Two stories. As we culminate a month where the LGBTQ community is celebrated and advocacy is more open and public, I think, as I think about this text, of a roommate I had my senior year of college, who in the quad of 4 of us living together, unexpectedly came out to my roommate and I. And Lawrence had come from a very strong evangelical family, a strong Christian background, grown up going to youth group, had a beautiful voice, sang in the choir at the college at Miami, collegiately, sang in his church choir. And he was a deep believer. And he was so worried not only about telling us the struggle that he had and that he had been gay, but telling his parents. And I will never forget the day that Larry came back to the house after the phone call to his mom and dad. And their reaction to him was, "Don't come home. You're no longer part of our family." And I thought to myself, here's this kid, 20 years old, who has been struggling and confessional about how he's been ashamed, how he's been hiding, how he's been lying, and trying to cover this up, trying to go to help groups for the last 8 years of his life, because this started 11, 12 years old. He started to have this awareness that he wasn't like everybody else. He didn't see people the same. That, as the guys were talking about girls, he was like, eh. And the pain of not only that journey, but the fear and courage to share that journey with his family and the hopes that they would still love him. And I think about that door being slammed shut, his sister being very supportive, but she was younger than he was, called him in tears and apologizing, but his mom and dad saying basically, we don't want relationship with you anymore, because even though we've known you for a lifetime, you're not welcome here. And the pain of struggling with his own faith journey, and the community had loved him, now saying, we don't love you anymore. Now, I'm not saying that all Christian communities are that way, but the pain of that wasn't only physical and emotional with his family, it was spiritual. And it was a long journey, much like this woman. And so as I read this text, I also think about how many of us are left for dead, invisible in the crowd, just hoping, if I can just get close enough to Jesus and nobody else notices, surrounded by people, yet completely alone and hollow inside, and desperate for love, desperate to belong, desperate to be whole. That's the story of a lot of our journeys. And then in preparing for this sermon, I thought about what happened this week on Father's Day. Really, the morning after. But, it started at 11 o'clock. Tornado sirens are going off. I'm coming upstairs. Robin's coming downstairs. Do you hear that? Yeah, let's get the kids out of bed who are all sleeping. Let's get the dog. Try and find the cat. Everybody down in the basement. And then the sirens go off at about 6 minutes later. And I'm thinking, okay, it's over, maybe. Then we start to head up. I look outside. There's really not any wind. It's just a strange, eerie calm. But the sky is all red, and it's weird to the west. And I look at the phone, and it says, now the storm has moved to Naperville. The winds have gone from 40 to 80 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour. I said, get back downstairs. We went back. We're huddled up. And then the doors start to shake. The house pressure rises. The girls' ears pop. And it is on us within 30 seconds of going down the steps. And the house is shaking. And glass is shattering. The lights go out. And trees are hitting the house. And we are terrified. And the girls are crying. And Robin's crying. And it passes. It feels like an hour. It's probably 15 seconds, maybe. And I asked the girls, are you all right? And there's Jillian in tears. I left my guinea pigs. They're so small. They're so scared. I left them. There wasn't time. Not knowing when we opened up the door what we would find. But this trauma, as we opened up the door, and our house is still intact, but there are trees everywhere. The fences are crushed. The windows there's glass all over. And I just think, my God, how lucky we were. How many times the church, we've gone and done trips to Maryville and Cape Girardeau and Joplin and Coal City and Washington, just down the road to the west. And in some of those cases, you couldn't even tell there was a neighborhood where the streets were. Everything is just wood and debris. There are no houses left, no road signs, no addresses, no place to call home. And I think about Lawrence, and I think about the tornado, and I think about loss, suffering, hardship, throwing ourselves before God and saying, in the midst of whatever storm of life, literal or in here, is churning, God, I need you. I am desperate. Do you see me? My daughter is dying. I can't do a thing about it but throw myself. And realizing how powerless I am, but how powerful you are. Do you see her? Lord, will you come to my house? A woman who's tried everything she knows, every doctor, every cure. If I just touch his robe. And it's in those moments, whether it's a slow burn, long struggle, or it's this immediate tragedy, the dying daughter, a tornado, and we come together and we see God. And God won't let us off with I'm just going to touch this and walk away. No. Somebody touch me, and I want to know who you are. And so he and the woman, face to face, eye to eye, I see you. Like Hagar in the Old Testament, blessed is the God who sees me. And how we see each other. Because honestly, we go through life so many days, so many months, some of us so many years, just blindly through our routines. And we don't see the need, the inner hurt of our neighbor right next to us. To me, the beauty of this text is a God who shows up and then says, I am present not in your time. I'm present all the way along this woman's journey, and I'm present in this moment of tragedy. One's catastrophic now, mayday, and one's a long, do you hear me, do you hear me? Cynical, spiteful, bitter, whatever she's been feeling, just despair. And Jesus says, I step into this with you. You're never alone. As community of faith, how do we first always go to the one who says, I am here. I am Emmanuel, God with us. And in the same breath, how are we also relationally present? Because that's church. So for those of you who are across, state lines or in another country, and you've been tuning in, and this has been kind of your spiritual home through this pandemic, let us know who you are. Write to us so that we can pray for you, that we can know something about you, because that's community. It's not anonymous. It's not unknown. And for those of you who've been home, gradually coming back, I know the pajamas are comfortable, but being together and seeing one another, being face to face, that's the very nature of our God. And in those moments, and there's just so many angels that I saw on Monday and throughout the week. So many of you have reached out, and thank you for the meals, for showing up, just for coming and asking, if nothing else, just asking, how are you? Your presence speaks volumes. That's what it is to be brothers and sisters. That's what it is to be body of Christ. So may God be with you, all of us. No matter what we're carrying when we walk through these doors or flick on the internet today, is a God who says, whether it's over a lifetime or your world's fallen apart overnight, I've got you, always. It's not just your faith that makes you whole. Even if you have doubts, even if you've got nothing left, I am with you, and I will carry you wherever you are, no matter who or where on this life's journey. You are loved and carried here. Amen.